and let's say you did the most of this, right? Obviously, you would come too far from the inside.
Correct.
So if we did this and our hips swayed and our chest went forward, you're going to move to the left as well.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Kerrod Gray here on the range today at the Osprey Point Golf Club, Don Law Golf Academy in Boca Raton, South Florida. Standing next to me, I got the man, Kenny Leach. Kenny, pleased to have you here, mate.
Thank you, man.
We got some great content for you guys today. We're going to be talking about eliminating the slice through controlling the hubs of your body throughout the motion, not only the setup, the backswing, and some downswing. If you're struggling with curving the ball too much left to right for the right-hander, vice versa for the left, well, this video, this is for you. Yeah, so there's, that's incredible ball striking, number one, but also a reasonable amount of speed, right? So,
yeah, I'd say, I mean, you got to hit it far enough to play. I mean, it's really, anybody that comes to me, I'm looking at three things. You know, I actually had a 15-year-old kid in here the other day. Had a beautiful golf swing, things look good, but he was hitting a 7-iron 135. And he's wanting to go to college. He was hitting it like 135, 140. And I was like, man, I mean, that's putting you back a huge step here. We've got to gain some distance. Maybe here's some things we have to sacrifice. You know, it's always about giving the player in front of you the right recipe. It's number one thing.
So like very often we'll hear players that want more speed, right? But it's not always about speed.
No.
What else are we looking for?
Oh, well, when somebody comes to me and takes a lesson, and I'm sure you've heard this too, nobody's ever come to you and said, I want to hit it shorter or I want to be less consistent, right? So those are the two words I hear every time. What do we want out of you? You know, how can I help you? What do we want? They always say, I want to be more consistent and I want to hit it further. Two things, right? But I always address the consistency first, right? I mean, that's my preference. I know there's people out there that want the speed and do all the stuff, but you've got to have a repeatable motion so that you can produce speed. Otherwise, you're going to be getting speeds in the wrong places, in my opinion.
And it's so true, right? And because distance can come from efficiency. Not necessarily just cranking it up, smashing out some weights in the gym and trying to rip it.
Exactly. If you're just take the face. If you hit the center of the face, you're going to maximize. That's our efficiency thing. That's smash factor, right? So if you hit the center of the face, you're going to be, as long as there's the right amount of loft applied, and you hit the center of the face, it's going to come off with the most speed, right? Now, if you hit it off the toe here, with all those same other factors, but now your toe, you're losing 15, 20 yards right there.
Minimal, right?
Minimal. I mean, it just depends on how bad you hit it. And then also, the ball starts to curve funky ways.
Absolutely.
You know?
I always tell clients, right, is that when we're doing on-course work, which I think is so important in really improving your game, is that when they're selecting a club into the green, everyone tries to play to their potential, not their average.
Correct.
And as soon as you mishit it, right, as soon as you go a little bit toe or a little bit heel, you're losing like 10 to 15% of distance off those shots, right? Especially when you got little butter knives like this.
But I don't know how you play those.
Oh yeah, neither do I. That's why I don't play. But when you're using game improvement irons, it's a little bit less, and that's why equipment's also important. But really, if we're talking this conversation today about how to improve someone's consistency, right? What are some of the big things that you work on with your players? Like you work with tour players, you work with beginners and kids and everything in between, across the board, no matter who you are, your age, your sex, your height, what sort of elements do you like to see in the swing?
So I like to kind of break the swing into three kind of hubs. Okay. If you can control those hubs, there's a very good chance you're going to touch the ball in the right spot. Touch the ground in the right spot, I should say.
Let's define a hub. What is a hub?
Okay, so a hub would just say, we'd say kind of, we have our mass, right? And we have our segments of our body. We have our head, our torso, our chest, our hips, and our lower half, right? So what I would say is the hub would be kind of right here in the center of our hips, right? And then I'd say somewhere in our sternum would be our center hub, right? Our torso, and then we'd say the center of our head.
So let's say that we were setting up to the golf ball in this fashion.
Okay.
Set up to that for me. So I want you to show me, let's say, a very common error, regardless of the player, of what they would make if they weren't to have a stable hub in any one of those.
So first off, you got to have a good setup. Okay, so if your hubs are already out of whack in alignment in the setup, you got no chance. Okay, so for example, if I stand here and I see this far too often with my amateur players, I mean even the pro players sometimes. So like a hip, So for example, we'll see a hip displaced kind of back like this and open.
Okay. So
I see that quite a bit.
If we're using this line down on the ground as a reference,
correct,
we see the center of the pelvis too far behind.
And you can tell that by my belt buckle.
Yeah.
Right. So if you just sit here and look at this and you look at it from face on, and if say you were like, if you had the line drawing tools apps on your phone, right? If you drew a line from your shoulders down,
yeah,
right, and you see that your right hip is on the right line and your left hip is completely off of it, this is telling you, well, you know, you got to make sure your camera angles are good.
Yeah.
But that's number one thing. I can't tell you how many times I get a video and I'm like, how's it look? And it's like from up in a tree.
I get the old, I get the old anti-view sometimes,
yeah,
like up at the swing.
like, yeah. Well, you look outside.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So no, but so you know, camera angles are important, especially if you're looking at this stuff. But you draw those lines, and if your hips are displaced like this and your chest is forward, I don't like your chances of starting with a stable hub.
And with that, right?
Yeah.
And there is such a follow-on effect of how you set up then affects the takeaway,
correct,
and the backswing,
correct,
and then downswing. And far too
correct,
many players, I was speaking with Eric yesterday, right? And when we were doing the videos, we're saying, you end up becoming at times such a setup and backswing coach because it just gives players a better chance from that position to strike the golf ball.
You're just, you know, it's like you're buying insurance on making sure you can actually make a decent move at the golf ball.
Correct.
If you're starting off heavy toes, you know, hips forward, standing straight up and down, you're not tilting properly, I guarantee you your shoulder plane is going to look like this at the top. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it just, I would start off, I mean, most of the time, my first lesson with my students is mostly just setup.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll say, okay, hey, this is where we're going in this direction. But I mean, mostly there's a lot of cues and just a setup they need to do. You know, so handle position, club, I mean, it's millions of stuff. But I first align the centers, so that we can help control the bottom of the arc.
Okay, so let's say you're setting up to this golf ball.
Okay.
And a player was to draw a line vertically up from the golf ball.
Okay.
What should they be looking for in regards to where their pelvis should be, where the middle of the sternum, and where their head should be?
So I would say this also differs from different type of clubs, right? So the driver, right? So for example, we were talking driver, obviously ball position more forward. Okay. Now we're talking the center of the body, right? The hips are going to be slightly forward, and you're going to have this little bit of secondary tilt right here. Beautiful. Right? So you're just going to have the center of your chest behind the center of your pelvis.
Yeah.
As you're hitting an iron, I would actually like to see them just a little less of that, right? But I still want to see the chest just slightly either on top or just slightly to the right.
So with this line drawn up, using your belt buckle as a reference here, right? Should the center of the belt buckle be on top of the line or slightly forward? What would you prefer?
And honestly, it does depend on certain people, but I'd say I'd bet more people would prefer from a hip that's just slightly forward, just because everybody tends to be more back. Yeah. Okay, so like, and you know, everything can be taken the wrong way, but honestly, I see this, I'm talking 75% of the time.
Yeah, 95% of golfers are slicers, right? And that right there, that's loading up a slicing pattern. This
is a slice pattern.
Yeah, so why don't we turn around, right? Yeah. Let's hit this shot. And what we're going to do is you set up, and I'm going to move your hips back, right? Okay. And we're going to demonstrate what the typical slicer would be. Okay. So we're going to move your hips back. Good. Generally, you're going to feel like your shoulder's going to twist open then. All right. Let's hit one from there. Off you go. So you're a high-level golfer, right? Yeah. You've played in professional tournaments. You're able to make it work. But
I don't know if that was made it work. I missed it.
Within reason.
It's solid, but it went 20 yards left. But go ahead. Yeah.
We would see that the majority of golfers from that position would really struggle with the slicing motion, right? Correct. The club cutting across.
Correct. So even in that, right, like what we're talking about is controlling those hubs, right? So if you're taking this back, right, and let's say you did the most of this, right? Obviously, you would come too far from the inside.
Correct.
So if we did this and our hips swayed and our chest went forward, you're going to move to the left as well, right? So you're just, wherever these hubs are, and as long as when I notice tour players, and I take a look at a lot of tour players, their hubs are pretty stable. Correct. They're centered, okay? They're not moving very far. Their pelvis is just rotating, right? More so, as it's loading and rotating, as opposed to a sway left or sway right. There might be a slight little right, but then it's gonna recenter at that top, right? So, but if you can control them, and as long as they're aligned properly, the plane of the swing is gonna end up being, this overall swing direction is going to be a little bit more neutral. Right?
So let's say setup is so crucial, right?
Yeah.
And what you've kind of demonstrated there is when we're setting up to a golf ball from the face-on perspective, I'll just get you to do that again for me. So from this position here, right? So we're set up, we talked about creating maybe the pelvis anywhere from on top, slightly forward of that center line. Then what are we doing with the sternum? You like to see it slightly behind the pelvis? How many degrees?
So I would say, like, for example, like I just, to make it easy on everybody, I use my zipper or my belt buckle, right? And my buttons. Okay, so when I'm doing this, take a look down, and you can look in reference to your line. Is my buttons ahead of my zipper?
Correct.
Okay, right? So what I would try to do is just feel like, for example, I'm noticing here, if I put this right in the center of my stance, now I've got my zipper more in line with that, right? And I've noticed that now I have my buttons right behind or on top, right? And the head positioned a little bit more neutral, right? So I wouldn't say there's too many degrees there, right? So if you're, a very simple way to do this is, I learned this from Mike Adams, right? I spent a little time with him, but if you put this right on your spine, right? So if you had a driver for a driver setup, you put this right on your spine, you tilt until you feel just a slight pull in your hamstrings, right? So when you tilt, it's just kind of like, we're not bending the knees, we're just pushing it back, right? And it's gonna pop out the other side. Then you're just gonna unlock your knees.
Amazing.
If you were hitting a driver, you would want more of this tilt.
Correct.
So we don't, like with an iron, it's not gonna quite hit our inside of our,
that's great. I've never seen that before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to quite hit the inside of our thigh, but with a driver, you're going to need more.
Okay.
Right? So you're just going to kind of almost feel like you either push your hips out, and always notice these references of the buttons and the zippers. Right? So if you see it like this, you need to push your hips forward. Okay? But if you see your buttons and you're looking down, and they're in line with that, then just tilt your upper body just slightly to the right. Nothing crazy.
I absolutely love easy to do reference drills such as this, because these guys watching this, right, they need this sort of thing, because even though as coaches we'd love to think that everyone films themselves, which is one of the most important ways to ensure that you're working on what you actually are, but having some sort of feedback. I use alignment sticks all the time, but using something like that, which everyone's got a golf club, otherwise you're not playing golf. Everybody,
right? So you can do this in your kitchen. I mean, just making sure you're in good setups, and I'd say actually the more you're setting it up and doing it, you're going to be doing it like second nature, right? So it just really, an iron just going to be slightly tilted to the left, but then the driver would be hitting your thigh. Okay. And how much tilt there is, just because we're along these lines here. So how much you're actually bending from the waist, really you would just simply, actually, I might need an assist on this, but if you just simply stand straight up and down, right? You stand straight up and down, you're going to put your hands right on the fronts of your thighs here. And all you're going to do is you're just going to tilt from the waist. So when I say, or we could say bend from the waist, right? So we're not going to bend our knees. That's very important. So this is, most of the time you have to have really good awareness, know what parts of the body you're actually doing. And I would highly suggest mirror work. Check the mirror or film yourself, one or the other. Okay. So if you bend from the waist, you just put your hands right here and you bend from the waist, and don't flex your knees yet. Just get to the tops of your kneecap. Okay, not quite the center of your kneecap, the tops, the upper parts, right? So if you want to know how much to actually tilt, right? So you would be here, straight up and down. You'd just have not push your arms down. You just comfortably bend from the waist so that your arms start creeping down. And once they get to the tops of your kneecaps, you just unlock your knees, and that's your setup, right? That's how much bend you have in your waist.
Amazing. So really, to summarize what we've talked about today, okay, the importance of creating a reference point for the hub. So as a reference point, trying to create these stable hubs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this ball position a little bit further forward. So we're going to use this stick as a reference of the center line of my body. Okay. So I would see that if I was going to dangle this golf club from my sternum directly down, I would like to see that my hips would slightly be forward from that, because I'd like to see about 55 or 60% of weight on the lead foot to start off.
I love it.
Right. And that's going to naturally increase the amount of side bend, and the longer the club that you have, the wider you stand, the more of this side bend that you're going to have at address. And then really from there, from the down the line, we see too many people with way too much knee flex, right?
Correct.
And that shifts their pelvis out of position.
Correct.
So if I can stand up straight, let my hand slide down to it touch the kneecaps, I can feel it goes back, a little stretch up the hamstrings, slight little knee flex, and then bang.
Bang, right there. Yeah, you're just where your arms feel comfortable from where they're hanging, where there's that comfortable. If you pulled your right arm just like off like that, and it's not pulling any left or towards you or away from you, you're at a good position here.
Mate.
Right? You got a chance.
That's awesome. Good job.
Thanks.